Murder, cannibalism, necrophilia, evil acts committed by extremely disturbed individuals, lacking in empathy and often unable to feel remorse. But each case is different, with everyone being just as strange as the last, as you'll see in this video. Here's a list of 5 highly disturbed serial killers. Number 1. A suitable nickname given to a man that drank the blood of his victims, ate portions of their flesh, and had sex with their lifeless bodies. Richard Trenton Chase, born in Santa Clara, California in May of 1950, was an odd young man going back to his earliest years, showing signs of the MacLeod triad by the age of 10, the suggestion that when a child shows a combination of 2 or 3 personality traits, arson, cruelty to animals, and/or bedwetting, then it is highly likely they will show violent behavior later on in adulthood. By the age of 25, Richard had been committed to a mental institution, complaining to doctors that his stomach had been turned upside down and that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery, as well as claiming that Nazis had been stealing his blood. He committed his first murder in December of 1977. Cruising around a quiet neighborhood in the middle of the day, he drove by the house of 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin, shooting him while he stood in his front yard, then driving away without learning the fate of his victim. Ambrose died shortly after. The second murder took place the next month, on January 13th. Richard let himself into the home of Teresa Wallen, a woman on her 3rd month of pregnancy. He shot her 3 times, killing her instantly. Now, in the privacy of the empty home, he decided to have sex with his victim's lifeless body, stabbing her several times in the process, before cutting her open and removing and consuming some of her organs, as well as drinking some of her blood. He then stuffed dog feces down her throat that he had collected from the backyard. Richard would go on to commit his final murders just a few days later on January 27th, 1978. Just as he had done previously, he calmly let himself into the home of 38-year-old Evelyn Meroth, who was in the home with her friend Danny Meredith, her 6-year-old son Jason, as well as 22-month-old nephew David. Upon entering, he shot Danny, killing him instantly, before brutally murdering Evelyn and the children, again choosing to cannibalize parts of her body, drinking her blood in the process. Chase was soon caught in late 1978, later standing trial in 1979. His lawyers claimed he was not guilty by reason of insanity, blaming his severe mental delusions and mental instability for the crimes, but the court disagreed and judged Richard sane, sentencing him to die in the gas chamber. He would never make it there, however, as he committed suicide in prison on December 26, 1980. Number 2. Many know of the crimes committed by infamous unknown English serial killer Jack the Ripper, who stalked the streets of Whitechapel, viciously murdering unsuspecting prostitutes, but lesser known are the crimes of Joseph Vacher, a French serial killer very suitably dubbed the French Ripper. Born in November 1869, Joseph grew up the youngest of 15 children and the son of an illiterate farmer. With not much being known about his early childhood, he joined the army when he was 17 years old. Due to his increasingly rude and egotistical attitude, Joseph's rise through the ranks of the military was slow-moving and not very successful. Embarrassed by his inadequacies, at some point, Joseph attempted suicide, slicing his throat with a razor, though he survived. On military leave and following his suicide attempt, Vacher fell deeply in love with a young girl, Louise Berat. Though he tried whatever he could, Louise would never come to return this affection. Joseph left the military in 1893, and upon returning home he quickly proposed to Louise, but to his extreme disappointment she rejected him, mocking him for even being so foolish. Enraged, Vacher pulled out a pistol, shooting her 4 times in the stomach, before turning the gun on himself, shooting himself in the head. Both survived, but Joseph would forever have the single bullet lodged in his skull. After spending 1 year in a mental institution, he was released. Shortly after, he would commit his first murder, strangling a 21-year-old mill worker and stabbing her multiple times in the throat before mutilating her body and leaving her in a hedge to be found by an unlucky passerby. Vischer would go on to kill 10 more people, 5 teenage boys and 5 teenage girls, brutally mutilating them as well as sexually assaulting them both before and after death. Not much is known about the victims due to them being children out on their own to become shepherds. Joseph Vischer was eventually captured in 1897 after he attempted to strangle a woman in an open field. The woman was quite strong and was able to hold him off as she called for help. He was captured and held in a local tavern where it's been said he played his accordion to entertain the bar patrons while they waited for local authorities to arrive. He was executed in the guillotine on December 31st, 1898. Number 3. We all have hobbies, activities we enjoy doing on a regular basis. Some people like going to see a movie, others like to play golf. Albert Fish enjoyed sticking small needles into his groin, leaving them there to poke him, and enjoying every last bit. Hamilton Howard Fish, born in Washington, D.C. in May of 1870, was a man long haunted by severe psychological problems reaching back to his earliest age. After spending 5 years in an orphanage being whipped and beaten until the age of 10, Fish moved to New York when he was 20 years old, earning money by prostituting himself, and would eventually start molesting and brutally killing young boys whenever he had the spare time, and would continue to do so for as long as he could before being married in a ceremony arranged by his mother. After that, he would start work as a house painter to support his wife and the 6 children that they would have. In 1917, Fish's wife left him and took everything, leaving him to care for their children on his own. It is from here that he would begin to form a list of strange and disturbing hobbies, including writing extremely vulgar letters to potential partners, whipping himself until he bled, having his children spank him with a spiked paddle, and sticking many small needles into his pelvic region. He would continue killing mostly young and disabled and African American children all throughout the 1920s, before eventually committing his most infamous crime, for which he would be caught. On May 28, 1928, Fish visited the home of 10-year-old Grace Budd. Under the impression that the man they knew as Frank Howard was going to hire their son to do work on his farm, the Budd family agreed to let him take their daughter, 10-year-old Grace Budd, to his young niece's birthday for the day, promising the girl cake and ice cream and saying he would have her back by midnight. He took her to an abandoned house where he stripped himself of all his clothes before luring the young girl to a second-story bedroom where he brutally murdered young Grace, dismembering her corpse and wrapping the pieces in newspaper for him to later prepare and eat. Fish would later come to write a letter to the Budd family describing in full detail how he murdered their daughter and roasted her remains in his oven. The letter, however, would eventually lead to his capture, as the stationery he used came from a hotel that Fish had been staying at. He was soon captured in December of 1934 and died in the electric chair on January 16, 1936. Number 4. Money can cause people to do unspeakable things, and this was something Belle Gunness knew all too well. Born Brynhild Paulsdottir Storseth in Norway on November 11, 1859, she grew up the daughter of a stonemason and the youngest of 8 children. Belle learned from an early age that life would be hard. She longed for a better future and would do whatever she deemed necessary to get it, immigrating to America in 1881 and working as a servant to a wealthy family. She would soon marry Mads Sorensen, with whom she would come to have 4 children, 2 of which would die shortly after birth. Soon after marrying, they would open a confectionery business together, but the business wasn't very great, and the building mysteriously burned down no more than a year later. After years of marriage, Sorensen died in July of 1900, with Bell quickly collecting 2 large insurance policies he had taken out on himself. Using the money, she bought a farm in LaPorte, Indiana, and married a man by the name of Peter Gunnis, from which she would take her infamous name. Shortly after the marriage, Peter's young daughter died under mysterious circumstances while alone in the house with Bell, with Peter following shortly after. Bell told authorities a meat grinder had fallen from a shelf and hit him on the head. The police were convinced, but people who knew Peter knew him as an experienced butcher and said he would never have made such a mistake. From there, she would go on to murder anywhere from 20 to 40 men, almost always claiming their insurance money or anything else of value. Her methods varied from bludgeoning to poisoning, depending on the circumstances. Disposing of the bodies, she would dig graves in the farm's pig pen, or if she was feeling too tired, she would chop the corpse into pieces and just feed it to the pigs instead. On April 28, 1908, the farmhand on Bell's farm woke up to a strong smell of smoke. Opening his door, he was greeted to intense flames. Struggling to breathe, he did the only thing he could and jumped out the window, running to town in his underwear for help. By the time he had returned with help in the early morning hours, the fire had burned itself out. Upon searching the smoldering remains, they came across 4 bodies, 3 of which were confirmed to be Bell's children. The 4th body, despite weighing almost half that of Bell and being a bit shorter, was determined to be the body of Belle Gunnis, and was laid to rest in Forest Park, Illinois, alongside her first husband. Following her death, authorities searched her home, eventually discovering the bodies of 12 men she had buried in her pig pen, most of which died from blunt force trauma. For years after her death, many people all across the United States reporting seeing Belle in almost every state, from Los Angeles to Chicago, with the most credible claim being that of the deathbed confession of her former farmhand, who said he was in love with Belle and helped her set fire to the farm after she had killed her 3 children, but she betrayed him and was never seen again. Number 5. Human history is a subject full of tragic events, including wars, natural disasters, and genocide. But there are also countless smaller and quite disturbing events that you most likely never learned about in school. The sickening crimes of Gilles de Rais, a commander in the French Royal Army, is one of them. Born in 1405 in western France, Gilles' parents died when he was very young, leaving him and his brother under the care of their grandfather. He began to make a name for himself by the age of 16, and by the age of 24 he was a commander in the French Royal Army. He would go on to enjoy a very successful military career, fighting in many famous battles and receiving many prestigious awards and titles during his years of service. But along with his success began to grow an uncontrollable desire to rape and kill young children, sodomizing and ordering the deaths of at least 40 young children, sometime around 1434, according to his own confession. Gilles left the military in 1435 at the age of 30, preferring to spend the remaining years of his life focusing on his personal interests and projects, including the production of a theater show that would drain most of his fortune and by the end leave him nearly bankrupt. Another interest that began to drain his fortune was that of the occult, hiring a man with experience to help him perform a number of summoning rituals in one of his castles. But the rituals never came of anything. But the thing that interested Gilles most of all was murder. He would begin by making his victim feel comfortable, giving them food and nicer clothes, before going to another room. He would either rape the child or masturbate onto the child's stomach, enjoying every minute of the agonizing pain they were feeling before taking them down and comforting them once more. Finally, he would murder the child using a number of brutal methods, mostly by decapitation or slicing their throat. According to Gilles, if he thought the child was beautiful, he would pick up a severed head, hold it up to the light, and kiss it. And also, according to his servant, his master would usually enjoy raping the children much more after death. He would then have the child cut open so he can enjoy the sight of their insides. He would eventually be arrested in September of 1440, after he kidnapped a cleric from a church during an argument leading to an investigation. The court made plans to torture Gilles, but quickly canceled them when he confessed to his crimes during his trial. That, combined with overwhelming witness testimony, led to the judges sentencing him to death by hanging. He was quickly executed on October 26, 1440. So, that was 5 of the most disturbed serial killers I can think of. I'd really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe so I can continue to improve my content and keep making my videos just that much better.